Everyone, thanks for joining our Claude for Managers webinar. We'll get started in a few minutes, but thank you all for joining. Looks like we got over 100 people here already. If everyone just wants to, we want to make this webinar as interactive as possible. And so if you want to use the comments inside of StreamYard to just answer where you're calling in from, and then what are you most excited to be hearing about? We're also going to be doing some polls throughout the webinar, and the way to respond to those are also via the comments. We'll do a test one in a second. But yeah, if everyone just wants to send a quick message, where are you dialing in from? And what are you most interested in learning about? And we'll get started in a few minutes once everyone has had a chance to join. All right, we have someone from Canada, from London, North Dakota, Philly, go Birds. We got France, Denver, Egypt. That might be a first. Love to see that. We got some New York City people. Nicole and I are dialing in from the Windmill HQ in New York City. South Africa. Awesome. All right. All over the US. Okay. All right. We'll get started in just 2 minutes here, and we'll kick it off. For all the people who are asking, yes, this will be recorded. We record all of ours. And Nicole will talk about where you can find the recordings of previous webinars.
While we wait another 2 minutes here, if people also want to throw in the chat how you first heard about this webinar, we're always curious to learn how people heard about us and what prompted you to join.
All right, let's get going here, Nicole. So from quick introductions, my name is Max Shaw, one of the founders here at Windmill, joined alongside by Nicole. Nicole, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Nicole and I'm the head of growth here at Windmill.
Great. Today we're going to be talking about Claude for Managers. We're going to go through a bunch of primarily focused on real world demos. I'm going to do all of these demos live, which is extremely risky, especially with how often Claude goes down, but we're going to give it a shot. We've done 2 previous webinars, more focused on HR, but I would definitely recommend watching those. There's tons of useful tips regardless of your role on how to best use Claude and Cowork and the different tools. So Nicole, where can people find these previous webinars?
Yeah, so all of our previous webinars, we have uploaded the recordings to our YouTube channel. This is a real screenshot of it here. It's just Go Windmill. And then we will be sending out an email after this webinar with a recording link. And you can always find them on YouTube as well.
Awesome. So before we jump into the demos, I got to do the quick commercial for Windmill. This will be hopefully the end of any advertising. But Windmill, what we do is we've built the first performance review platform that people actually like. The secret sauce of why we're able to do what we do is the context graph for your people, which I'll talk more about. But at a high level, we make performance reviews much faster and much easier. And most importantly, we pull every single person who's gone through one of our cycles. And 93% of employees, both managers and individuals, say it's the best performance review cycle they've ever run. So if you're interested in learning more about Windmill, we'll have next steps at the end, or just go to our website and sign up for a demo. Today, we're going to be talking primarily about how to use AI and how to think about AI, especially if you're running a team. And this could mean you just have a small team or you're running an entire department. Some brief history about myself. I worked at a company called Yext in New York City for 10 years. I started as an individual contributor. I was then managing one person. And when I was managing one person, I was a first-time manager. And I felt pretty good about doing a pretty good job. I read all the books. I spent a lot of time, probably half my time, really thinking about that direct report. And I thought I did a really good job, especially for a first-time manager. But then pretty quickly you realize the more reports you have, the more challenging the problem. And so I went from 1 to 5 to 10. And then the second you go to 20 or 50 and you have managers reporting into you, you quickly realize that you end up spending a lot of your time on tedious tasks that are pretty low leverage. You spend a lot of your time just trying to figure out what's going on. And one of the biggest gaps that you quickly realize is that your memory is pretty bad. It's hard enough to remember what you did yesterday. Trying to remember what your entire team has been working on for weeks on end is pretty much impossible. AI has made this a lot easier if you use it in the right way. And so that's what I want to talk a lot about today. The way I think about it is kind of three kind of core workflows to think about your operating cadence. You have your daily workflows. AI is really helpful for things around meeting prep, whether that's like a briefing in the morning or getting briefed right before a meeting, follow-ups, action items, staying up to date on Slack. You then have that weekly cadence, which we're going to focus today primarily on one-on-ones. And how can you keep those one-on-ones a continuous conversation and not starting from scratch each time? And then you have those quarterly or those semi-annual flows where you're really trying to develop talent. Sometimes that looks like a performance reviews. Sometimes it looks like just a bigger monthly conversation. But you want to make sure those conversations and those coaching opportunities are grounded in the truth of what actually happened, not just based on what you can remember. If people have questions as I go, please put them in the chat. I will pause to answer questions as we go throughout this webinar. Now, underneath our platform is what we call the context graph for your people. And whether you're using Windmill or not, this is what you need to be building up. And I'll talk more about it. We think of it as 4 layers: people, evidence, standards, and perspectives. If you want to use AI to help you manage a team, help you coach yourself individually, help you level up and develop talent, you need to make sure it has all the right context, or else you're going to get bad information. And so really the lesson here is less about like what AI model to use. They're all really good. It's all about how can you feed it the right context to be able to answer these difficult questions. So with that, we're going to jump into some live demos. So I'm going to share my screen. Nicole, does that look good?
Looks good. We can see it.
Okay, great. And please jump in if it ever gets too small. So the first is there's a lot of apps out there, and Nicole will put up a poll on the screen. I'm curious, what are people using? And you kind of have, there's some other providers, but there's generally 3 model providers. There's Gemini, which is Google, there's OpenAI, and there's Claude. And then within each of them, they have a bunch of apps and different ways of using them. And it's really confusing, actually, if you don't stay up to date on this. I'm curious if people just want to put a 1, 2, or 3. 1 is Claude, 2 is OpenAI, and 3 is Gemini. Let's get a read on what are people using. And I know this is, I'll match the poll here. It's a little confusing. So Gemini is number 3. Claude is number 1. All right, so it's about 64% are using Claude, 17% are using OpenAI, and Gemini is at 21%. I'm actually a little surprised Gemini is higher than OpenAI, but I guess things are changing pretty rapidly. If I had done this same poll 6 months ago, I would have guessed that OpenAI or ChatGPT would probably be close to 90% of the usage. So things are evolving really quickly. So now inside of each of these, there's a bunch of different tools. Inside of Claude alone, you've Claude Chat, you've Claude Cowork, you've Claude Code. OpenAI is ChatGPT, Codex, CLI, and the Codex app. The way I think about these is that they have different abilities, but they also have different levels of complexity. So where most people started is with these basic chatbots. So it's like ChatGPT and Claude Chat, and also put Gemini in this category. These are just basically questions and answers. And especially in the beginning, it didn't really have any context about who you are or what work you did. It was really just asking questions similar to what you might ask on like Google. Now, over time, what's emerged that's become really popular is these, what they're called harnesses that work on your actual computer. So Claude Cowork and the Codex app fit into this category. And then there is the Codex CLI and Claude Code. So in terms of complexity, these CLIs are going to be the most complex. I would only go to those if you're an engineer. There's no real reason to use these unless you're actually doing engineering tasks. Claude Cowork and Codex app is what I recommend for most people who are trying to level up when it comes to AI. We're going to be doing all of our demos in Claude Cowork. But the Codex app, for anyone who uses OpenAI, is actually really good now. They've just released it about a month ago, and it's gotten really good. So both of these are very similar in how they work. Now, one key difference between these is that these chat apps exist on the web, while these apps are local on your computer. And so what does that mean? Because I think it's a pretty important distinction, is if I go to Claude Chat right here and I say, what's on my desktop? It's going to have no idea what I'm talking about, right? It's going to say, I don't have access to your computer's desktop. This is happening. It's in the web. It has no access to my computer. Claude Cowork works very differently. And so you can pick a folder you're working in. And I could say, so I created this folder for this webinar. I could say, what's in this folder? And it will tell me the information that's inside this folder. And so it's running a command, right? You can actually, if you drill in, you can actually see what command it read. It ran this script. This is the kind of script that an engineer would usually write, but you don't have to. And it says there's 3 files in this folder, and we'll talk about these files later. Now, not only do you need to pick the right app, but there's a lot of different terms and different things that get thrown around. So I bucketed into kind of 4 different categories, and we're going to talk through all these a little bit today. You have these context management tools. So generally, these are called skills increasingly, and I've highlighted the ones that Anthropic or Claude, the term they use. But these have changed a lot over the last, even the last 3 months. But commands, rules, / commands, custom instructions, project instructions, gems, Google likes to call them. All of these are doing the same thing. They are just inserting context into the conversation. So it's basically just copying and pasting a bunch of text and then putting it into the conversation. I'd assume most people have used skills before. If people just want to put into chat, maybe some skills that they've used and that they found helpful. Most people I talk to have started to figure out skills and how to use them, and also how you can share skills. I went into this a lot deeper in my last webinar, so I'm not going to go as deep this time. But skills are pretty helpful. So we have an LLM council, which is interesting, where you actually have a skill that asks a bunch of different models or personas about a question. Monday digest, Friday wrap up. Jessica makes her own. She sounds like a pro. So skills are a great way to, anything that's repeatable, skills are a great way to do that. Now, connectors are how you get context from other applications into your conversation, into your task. This has been the big jump over the last 4 months that's made AI really powerful, is now it can connect everything that you use right now. So these are technically, it's using the MCP framework. Sometimes they're called integrations or apps. They're all pretty much the same thing. It's how can I connect other applications like Notion, like Granola, like Zoom, like GitHub, like Windmill to my chat conversation. And I'll demo a bunch of those as well. Now, 2 new things that I'm pretty excited about that are actually going to spend a good amount of time talking about, because most people have not done these. If you have used either of these, I'd be curious. And I think, Nicole, we have a poll we can put up. But scheduled tasks and live artifacts. Scheduled tasks also are called like scheduled actions or cron jobs. These are basically things that run on a schedule. So every Monday morning at 7 a.m., I want to do something. This is how you set it up. And in Claude Cowork, they're called scheduled tasks. And then live artifacts. So this is where, on some of my previous webinars, I showed this, but basically you make a website to help you understand data. And you have AI, instead of having a conversation, you have AI write a website. And this is a really powerful workflow. And Claude recently released live artifacts, which I want to spend some time talking about. We'll have another poll here. I'm curious. So it looks like most people have used scheduled tasks, about 83%. Live artifacts, I'm curious how many people, what percentage of people have used these. They are different than regular web artifacts. and we will show you them. So with that, let's start to jump into demos. The first place I want to start, and this was the most highly requested item, is one-on-ones. And how do you use one-on-ones with AI? Overall, I actually think it's a pretty simple use case and a pretty simple way to make yourself a lot more effective. There's kind of 3 stages. There's the before the one-on-one. How do you get up to speed? How do you figure out the topics that you want to talk about? There's during the one-on-one, which is absolutely critical. If you want AI to be helpful, you need to write something down. Now you can record it or you can take notes. Both are perfectly fine. People have different levels of comfort, and you can record stuff with like a local recorder like Granola or via Zoom, or like Notion has a recorder. But it's really critical you write stuff down, and at a minimum, take some high-level notes about what was discussed and what are the key action items. On the right-hand side is actually after the one-on-one. How can you make sure the stuff that you say you're going to do, you follow up on? And also maybe how can you coach yourself on how to run more productive one-on-ones in the future? So let's jump into Claude Cowork. And first thing I'll show you is I have a bunch of connectors hooked up. You can see them right here. I'm going to turn off my iMessage to be safe. And actually, I don't need Granola. In general, you want to have as many of your tools connected to Cowork as possible. The models have gotten pretty good at figuring out which tool to use. Now, in order to connect different systems, you go to this customize menu, and here are all the connectors. There's a bunch of other ones right here. And then if I go plus and browse connectors, there's tons more here. So all the tools that you use that you've had, like if you work at a bigger company, IT has given you clearance to connect to Claude Cowork, you're going to want to connect. That's how you're going to get the most powerful workflows. Skills I talked about. I'm not going to go too deep on skills here because I think most people have used them. This is where you find all your skills. And if I go back here, if I type the / command, here I can see all my skills. Scheduled tasks you find right here. I don't have any scheduled tasks set up right now. And then live artifacts you find right here, which you'll notice I do have a few set up that I'll talk more about. This is a new thing that's pretty exciting. So let's start with one-on-ones. The first thing you need to do is you need to have a system that can tell Claude when do you have one-on-ones and who are they with. It needs to understand your org chart because it needs to understand who's a direct report, who's a peer. Now, we're, of course, going to use Windmill as this. And so if I say, who are my direct reports? This will query the Windmill connector. Under the hood, this uses an MCP. And if this is working, it should give me a list of some employees. So if you don't have a tool to connect to here, you need to put this information somewhere. And the simplest way to do it if you don't have anything is just put in a local file. So inside of that folder, create a markdown file that just lists out, here are my direct reports. You could also put it inside of, if we go to settings, and we go to these instructions for Claude, you could also put it right here. You can also have global instructions for Claude Cowork, so you could also put it right here. But it needs to be somewhere, or else Claude will have no idea who's on your team. Next thing is, what one-on-ones do I have this week? Again, you need a system for pulling in your one-on-ones. You could use Google Calendar for this. The issue with that is that it's not always obvious which is a one-on-one, like a real one-on-one with a report, versus just a conversation with someone else, or potentially a conversation with someone externally at the company, externally at another company. So you need a good system here. Google Calendar works okay. We obviously are using Windmill as the source of truth here. So here you can see today I have a bunch of one-on-ones, and I have a one-on-one coming up with Marcus at 3 p.m. Now, I'll quickly jump into the Windmill platform just so you can see how we think about things. And then I'll talk about how I can use Claude to kind of recreate a lot of the same workflows we have. So this is the one-on-one view for Marcus. Marcus is not a real person. This is all fake data. But you get the idea of how this can all work. So here we have every single week, we have notes. Again, it's really critical to take notes or record the meetings and store them in a centralized way. On the right-hand side, we have what's called Catch Me Up. So this is one of the first things you want to do before one-on-one is to try to get up to speed on what Marcus has been doing. The second thing is to figure out what should you talk about. And we have this concept called suggested topics, where we suggest things that might be relevant based off previous one-on-ones, based off of what Marcus has been doing in different systems, based off of feedback or private notes, which I'll talk more about. So let's go back and let's say what's on the agenda for Marcus today. And then I could ask a prompt like, what topics would you suggest that are not already on the agenda? So here you can see this is what's on the agenda for 3 p.m. Marcus, use previous one-on-ones, feedback, and private notes with ideas. So previous one-on-ones, this is kind of a no-brainer. You should have a running log of all your one-on-ones and feed previous ones in. Feedback is absolutely critical. So the way we think about feedback is feedback where other people or myself have given feedback to Marcus. Now that feedback might only be visible to me or it might be visible to Marcus, but this is basically feedback from peers and other people across the company. And then private notes is another really critical thing where as a manager, it's really hard to remember everything that's going on. And so you should be constantly kind of taking notes of what you're seeing, what you're observing, and I'll talk more about this. Now, we're using Windmill for private notes. You could also use like Apple Notes if you want to store it locally. You could use Notion. You could use Google Docs. The important thing is to write everything down and then connect it to the system, right? And so here we have some suggested topics that weren't on the agenda, but are really good to think about based off of the previous one-on-ones, the private notes, and the feedback, right? And so there was like a private note and feedback today about this topic. And so this is maybe something that's really good to talk about. Or this toast pattern, he's a designer. So I could say, can you add the toast pattern to the agenda, right? So you want to make it really easy to come up with ideas. And then you want to make it really easy to put these in a place so that you can remember to talk about them. So here in Windmill, we have a shared agenda. You can also use a shared Google Doc or a shared Notion doc. Any of those will work, but you want to keep it up to date. And so here, Claude will actually update the agenda based on these suggestions. In general, we don't think that you should use AI to fully generate the entire agenda. We think the manager and the employee, and people have different preferences around whether the actual report is the one writing the agenda or the manager, but you should be the one deciding what to talk about. Yet you use AI to give you ideas, to jog your memory. That's the most effective way to do it. And so now added a new agenda item under the name. And so you'll now see there's this toast pattern that I just added to the agenda. And then when I talk to Marcus at 3 p.m., I can have that conversation. So that's before the meeting. Then you have the meeting. Again, you're going to want to record it. I would recommend taking notes or using Granola or Zoom. And then after the meeting, you want to make sure you follow up on action items, right? And so I could say, what action items came out of my previous one-on-ones with Marcus? So you can see how all this is pretty easy if you have all the context stored in one simple place, and I can kind of prompt my way. So this is basic one-off of kind of doing this one by one, but generally you're going to want to set up more scheduled actions here. And so let me show you the way I like to do it. I'm going to start a new chat and say, what one-on-ones do I have this week? So there's two different workflows here. One is using scheduled actions. The other is using live artifacts. So the first, I'm going to use scheduled actions, and I'm going to say, every Monday at 9 a.m., can you give me a list of the one-on-ones for the week? And I'm actually going to use this app called Whisperflow to just talk to my computer because that's faster. Give me a note that includes what's on the agenda for each one-on-one, as well as any suggested topics that might be relevant. Every Friday at 5 p.m., I want a refresh on all the action items from across the one-on-ones. So I want another action on Fridays, tell me which one-on-ones happened, and then what we talked about in each one-on-one. So this is a workflow I like, where on Mondays you get prepped for the week, and then on Fridays you kind of get a reminder where it's like a few days after it happened, I get a reminder of, here's what you talked about. Some people like to do this day of, some people like to do it the week of. That's personal preference. But this is the best way to set up what are called scheduled tasks. So you'll see here, Claude will go through this, and it's actually creating scheduled tasks. It looks like actually it's creating 3. I only wanted 2, but we'll let this run. This is creating that scheduled task. And then we'll schedule that first one. And now if I go to scheduled task, here we can see it. Weekly one-on-one preview. Now you'll notice it has like a bunch of like terminology in here. This is why it's very helpful to have Claude. You can see the exact workflow I did here. I first asked Claude to do it manually, and then I told it to create a scheduled action. That's a pretty important workflow because it figures out how to use the tools. Trying to write something like this from scratch is very tedious and you can easily mess it up. So having Claude do it once and then tell it to turn it into scheduled action is the most reliable way to do this. Now, I could run it once and you'll now see this new scheduled section, but this will run next time at June 1st at 9 a.m. So we'll just create those two scheduled actions. Now, that's one way to do it, and I'll get basically chats inside of Claude. Another really exciting way to do this is with live artifacts. So I'm going to create a new chat. Let's say, what one-on-ones do I have this week? All right, we'll start the same chat. And if there's any questions, definitely throw those in the chat.
Yeah, Max, we actually have a couple of questions we might want to answer while we let this load. Someone come in from Stacy asking, can you do whatever you can do in Windmill instead through Claude?
We try to give as much feature parity as possible. Now, this is the caveat, Claude is hooked up to the Windmill MCP, right? So Claude with the Windmill MCP is very similar to everything you can do in the platform or with our own agent named Windy. We try to make it so that you can use whatever tool you want and get access to all the same context. Some of the things like the catch me up and the suggested topics, and obviously this interface is obviously only in Windmill, but we try to expose as much capabilities as possible via an MCP. We believe in being a very open platform. So that's why you're able to see me doing a lot of stuff using Windmill, but via Claude.
Great. And then one more question. Christopher asked, is there a concern that we are providing training data for these tools to eventually fully automate people management?
I don't have that concern. So there's the basics of when you're using these applications, you can turn on what's called zero data retention, ZDR, which basically says these apps will not use your data to train any systems. I don't think people management will be fully automated away. I don't think it's going to be a bunch of people reporting into an AI bot or something. That doesn't seem realistic to me. I do think every manager is going to be using AI heavily to augment themselves and to become more powerful managers, more powerful coaches. But no, I don't have that concern. Some people might, but that's not a concern for me.
Yeah, and I think a stance that we take as a company, and we've talked about a lot, is in the age of AI, people mattering more. Both people in terms of HR leaders and the actual ICs and managers at companies and the work that they do. In some of our previous webinars, we talked about at the end how to make decisions around what work AI should own and where human judgment is still really important. So highly recommend checking out those webinars if you want to learn more.
This question as well, quickly want to highlight, does connecting Claude with an HRIS break confidentiality? This is a really important question. The answer is no, because when you hook up an MCP, it is permissioned as you. So I can only see these one-on-ones because I'm logged in essentially via Claude through the MCP into Windmill. It doesn't mean it has global access to everything in the platform. Now, every MCP is different, but most MCPs will use your personal authentication in order to scope all the data. Okay. All right. So here, what we're doing is creating our first live artifact. This is a new tool. I don't know if people have used this before. It is a little buggy, so I will add that. But it's pretty powerful. So what it's going to do is create a dashboard. In this case, a tracker. I called it a tracker. That's going to show my schedule for the week as one-on-ones. So let's do this create. We'll see if this works. This often happens. You can see it did not work as corrected. It's showing no one-on-ones scheduled. Can you review the tool call outputs and make sure you are parsing it correctly? So as with all live demos, they do fail. This happens a good amount with live artifacts. I find this prompt right here to review the tool call outputs and make sure you're parsing it correctly to work pretty well. One thing I will call out, I am using Opus 4.7 for all of this. This is the best model available. And so when you're using live artifacts and stuff like that, I would use Opus. So we'll give this a shot. and see if this works. If not, we'll go back to one that. If there's any questions while we wait, some of these are going to be a little bit slower now because we're trying to do more advanced stuff.
I think we've got a couple questions here. One around how could you set up Claude as a coach to give you feedback on how you did as a manager during a one-on-one?
Yeah, so the simple thing there is just to feed in a transcript and ask AI, how could I do better? You can set it up as a scheduled action so that every day it reviews the one-on-ones you had and it will give you feedback. Now, the critical thing is that you need to record the meetings if you really want to get good feedback. And so I know people have different philosophies around that, but increasingly when I talk to people, they are recording one-on-ones. I find it helpful for both parties. And of course, it should be private to those two people. But once you have that transcript, AI is really good at giving you feedback and you can point in the right direction if there's specific things you want to work on. Okay, so I just did that and we can see it was fixed. So now I just created this weekly one-on-one tracker, which you can see, where is it? It's this guy right here. I know this is like pretty zoomed out. I can just ask, make all the font bigger. But this is now a live artifact. So the cool thing about live artifacts is that they get updated automatically. So you can see this was last updated 2 minutes ago. At any point, this is not a static website. At any point, I could reload this and it will pull in the latest information. So this is a very different thing that had it previously wasn't really possible within Claude. But now I have this nice dashboard of kind of like, hey, here's how I want to see all my one-on-ones. Now, the cool thing about this is I can customize this UI to however I want to look at stuff, right? So let's say I made it bigger. Let's see if that worked. Okay, made it a little bit bigger. Now, let's say I like a horizontal layout. And so if I go into, this is my whiteboard. One cool way to prompt Claude artifacts is to copy and paste screenshots. So this is kind of the layout I want. And then we'll go back here. Can you make the layout look like this? So I'm actually pasting an image. I drew this on like a virtual whiteboard. You could have just drawn it by hand and taken a photo of it. And what the AI is supposed to do here is from a vertical layout, it should change it into a horizontal layout. Now, one thing that's pretty nice here is you see direct report versus skip level because Windmill has context about the org chart. There's a question around, do live artifacts tend to eat credits quickly? Yes, these are definitely very token heavy. They will eat your usage pretty quickly. We had another question, can you share artifacts? I don't know the answer to this. There is a share button that looks like this, and I don't know what to do here. If I do share and copy link, it says share failed. So I'm not sure the answer. It's clearly coming, but this is still a new thing, and Anthropic's latest stuff tends to be a little buggy, but which is maybe a little ironic. But it doesn't seem like sharing actually works, but it's clearly coming. Now, when you share, the question will be, it's going to use the other person's permissions, right? So you want to keep the artifact the same, but you want to use their permissions. Yeah, people are saying you can share them in chat, not Cowork. Those are not live artifacts. Those are just regular artifacts, which you can share. The power of these are that they're live artifacts. So every week when I open this, or every day when I open it, it's going to update. So here we go. Now we got my new layout that you saw. I can go bigger. And now you see I have it Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. It tells me my next one's with Marcus at 3 p.m. I can actually click in and go right into Windmill, which is cool, and see all these. Now, you can then take this a step further, which is cool. And so I have this bigger guy, which has made a bunch of other information. And I'm going to say, add more tiles for more information about my team. And so here you can see I'm actually building my own like little operating cockpit for how I want to run my team. And so here are the modules I put on here. I put one-on-one calendar. I put any one-on-one action items consolidated across the one-on-ones I have right here. Recent feedback from the team, just highlight right here. And then trends across the team, I'm pulling in some key stats that I want to keep track of. Now, if I wasn't doing a live demo, I would show you a bunch more things from other systems. I didn't want to use my personal information here, but some other ideas that are helpful. Recent emails requiring action. So if you want to pull in what are some emails over the last 24 hours that require my action that I have not responded to, you can make a tile like that. I like these two Slack ones. Slack's awaiting others' responses. So what are Slack messages that I've sent that have not been responded to? And then what are Slack messages that are awaiting my response? Competitor monitoring is another fun one. I actually can show. We have a bunch here, so let's show. So this was like, I did one on like AI chip startups, just for fun. I know it's very small. These artifacts are like too small, but you can kind of get the idea. And again, the cool thing is I can reload this whenever I want. I'll talk about this in a second, but here's like a support dashboard. Again, I can reload that whenever I want. Let me see. This was the team live tracker that I built earlier today. It's using the exact same prompt, which is basically just that screenshot. So you can see the style's a little different, but I have my direct reports. I have the one-on-one calendar right here. That way I wanted it. I have my action items from across the team. I have recent feedback from across the team. And then I have some trends as well. So you can start to see how you can combine, and not just Windmill data, you can use any kind of data you want, combine it all together, call the APIs, use an LLM on top of it. And so now this is something that I can just always have open and check this a few times a day, and it's always sitting there for me. So a combination of scheduled actions when you want to get proactively pinged, and then these live artifacts for kind of more of these visual data visualizations that still update whenever you want is a really good pattern for keeping track of all these different things. All right, this is still working. I'm not going to let this one finish because these are slow. They do take a lot of tokens. This is kind of on the bleeding edge of what AI is capable of. Nicole, any other questions that I should answer before jumping to the next section?
We have one other question around useful or unique workflows that you are doing with scheduled tasks that teams can use daily or weekly. I know you talked about this a bit with artifacts, but any ideas here?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I go back to this slide, you can see this. These are some of the most common ones. The briefs, I would say, are the most popular and helpful for people on my team. So a brief in the morning or a brief before every meeting, and then after meetings, action items and follow-ups and stuff like that. I'll show a few other examples as we go, but I know we've also released a cheat sheet that we'll share that also has a bunch of really good workflows. Okay, let's keep moving. I want to jump into, where are we? My big whiteboard. Okay, so I want to jump into something that I've been doing more recently around encouraging consistent behavior. And so as a manager, one of the things you often have to deal with is I have a bunch of little things that I want people to do. And sometimes, unfortunately, they don't always do it. For any sales managers, keeping the CRM up to date is a really good one. For any like engineering orgs, responding to PRs quickly. Or anything around like for design and products, I care a lot about sharing work in progress, sharing learnings, for recruiters, responding to candidates quickly, right? There's all these little things that you want people to do, and you want to make sure that people are doing them, and you don't really want to have to micromanage too much. You don't really want to have to think about it that much. And so the system that I've come up with that works really well is kind of three different pieces. First is measuring. Second is praising publicly. And then the third is coaching individually. So let me show you what that looks like. So we'll use, we're going to take a new task. And one of the things that I want my product engineering team to do is share work in progress. So they share videos in a shared Slack channel. And so I created this video leaderboard. I created this earlier. This is a live artifact where I can get a sense of what's going on, what's going well, what's not going well. Now, this is good for me, and I could share this with the team, but I want to do more than that. And so the other things I like to do are, first is, can you get a list of the top 10 people who shared the most amount of videos over the last 4 weeks based on the CSV? So first I'm going to ask Claude to get a top 10 list. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to share it in this team engineering channel. Can you send a Slack message to Team Eng? So my Claude is hooked up to Slack. This will just draft a message, which we'll give it in a second. Okay. And then I can send that. And now here is the message that got sent in Slack. Now, it always will say it's sent from using Claude, which I like. I'm not pretending that I sent this myself or I crafted this each week. But it is a really good way to kind of keep this top of mind if this is a behavior that I think is really important. Now, I could also, of course, schedule this to run every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Maybe right before we have our all hands, I want this to go out or something like that. Really good use case for scheduled action. And now every single week at 10 a.m., we will get a public leaderboard of the people who are at the top of the list. Now, I'm not posting everyone. I'm not calling out the people who aren't on the list. The way I like to handle that is via more private coaching conversations. And so can you find how many people have posted less than 5 videos? Less than 2 videos. And for these ones, what I actually do is I have Claude automatically add something to the one-on-one agenda. And so let's see what this pulls up. Okay, so these 2 different people. And I'm going to say every Thursday, or actually, let's do it every Sunday night at 10 p.m. Can you review the list of videos for anyone who has sent less than 2 in the last 2 weeks? Add an agenda item to my next one-on-one with them to discuss this topic. So now, without having to think about it, Claude will automatically every Sunday night, it's going to look through the recent video, the behavior that I want to focus on, right? And it could be any behavior. It's going to, in the middle of the week, it's going to shout out the people who are doing a good job. And then for the people who aren't meeting my expectations, and in theory, I should have talked to them about it and told it something that's important, it will automatically add it to the agenda of the next one-on-one so that you never even need to think about it again. So then just walking into a one-on-one, if this person isn't meeting this behavior, it's already on the agenda and you know it's something you want to talk about. Now, if you don't want to automatically put it on the agenda, another thing you could do is just save it as a private note. And then it would potentially be like a suggested topic for you, but you decide if you want to talk about it. Either way, you're recording this. And then when it comes to things like performance reviews, you have all that information. So I could schedule that, and that will now go Sunday night. So it's a really good pattern. Another example I wanted to show is the support dashboard. Maybe I care a lot about response times. And so if you have over, I don't know, a 7-hour response time. So let's say if for anyone with greater than 7-hour response time in the support, add an item to discuss. And now Claude, again, will look through all the data. It's going to find people who have greater than 7-hour response time. And then it's going to automatically add it to the one-on-one agenda. Now, in order for all this to work, one, your computer needs to be running, which someone just brought up. You can turn this on. Scheduled tasks only run while your computer is awake. You can press this on and it will enable it, but it needs to be plugged in. This is why people are increasingly like buying other computers to run this kind of stuff. when the system needs to know all the data, right? It needs to know, where do you store one-on-one agendas? When is the next one-on-one? How do I pull these response times? And once you have all that information available, then it can piece it all together and automatically add it to the one-on-one agenda, which is a really good workflow. So now, without having to think about any of these kind of like routine stuff that I expect people to be doing, we are sharing publicly when people are doing a good job. We are coaching individually by saving anyone that is missing the SLA to a one-on-one or private note or feedback, so you can have that private conversation. And then I'm using the live artifact as a way to kind of stay up to date and have that like global dashboard sliced in a bunch of different ways. So that is encouraging consistent behavior. The next thing I wanted to talk about was getting stuff out of your head. You want to be building what sometimes people refer to as like a knowledge base to augment your memory. People's memories are very bad. It's really hard to remember anything. So you want to write stuff down. And the way I approach this is use whatever the simplest tool is to just get your thoughts out and then deal with it later. So one thing I like to do is a lot of voice notes. I use my phone. I use this app called Whisper Memos, which I actually don't think is that popular, but I find it's really good at just quickly recording a voice note and then transcribing it. You want a place to store private notes. You could use something like Apple Notes. You could, of course, use Windmill. The important thing is you write that stuff down. Slack shortcuts is a really good one. Windmill has this integrated. You could also build your own custom one. But if I see something like this, and I'm like, hey, this is something I want to talk about in my next one-on-one, I can just one-click add it to the agenda item, and then we're done, right? Really quickly. If I just want to save this as a private note, this is something I want to talk about when the timing is right, I can just go in there and one-click save. So having these workflows that meet you in the work, where the work is really helpful. If you do have a lot of unstructured text, like I have this voice note, what AI is really good at is just taking all that and turning it and structuring it for you, right? So I have a voice note in this folder. Can you parse through the entire voice note and create private notes inside of Windmill so I don't forget this information? And so we'll do a prompt like that. Inside of this folder, you'll see I just have this voice note, which is just something I recorded walking to the office today. Just some fake stuff about people. But you can see I talked about each individual person, kind of, here's Marcus and Tom and Daniela and Eric. And so it's going to, and there's one unclear one. It's going to set up a task list. It's going to load the Windmill skill. Then it's going to have to look up all these people, right? So who is Daniela? Who is Eric? Who is Tom? It's going to try to find those people based off the team that reports to me, and then so you'll see it's looking it up. So then I'm going to create all the private notes, and then it's going to verify it worked. So really simple workflow to quickly get your thoughts out so you don't forget stuff. And if you do this continuously on a weekly basis, then when it comes time to have those bigger conversations, you have all these specific examples that you can tie back to. Another good thing I like to do is, can you review all my recent notes and one-on-ones and give me ideas? And so that I can reflect on my team. I want a list of reports and some stuff to jog my memory. Very similar thing. I actually have this scheduled for every Friday. I just get a list of here are potential things that might be kind of jog your memory, that's stuff you might want to think about. And then I can use that and actually turn that into a voice note, just kind of walking around, recording my thoughts on what's going well and where things could be improved. And then when I have my next one-on-one, it's all right there, surfaced to me. So doing that right there. So trying to find workflows that make it so that you can easily write down stuff, record stuff in the moment is absolutely critical. And then whatever the format is, and that's why AI is so powerful, it can parse through it and figure it out, right? And so it's confused about this person. This was supposed to be Priya. This is also supposed to be Priya. It will figure it out, parse it, and now when it comes time to have those a one-on-one or a bigger conversation, I have all the information that I need. Any other questions, Nicole? Then I want to just quickly touch on performance reviews.
No other questions that I see yet.
Okay, great. All right, the final thing I want to talk about is performance reviews. So this is maybe a little less about AI and more about how do you use AI in an effective way when you're making difficult decisions like a performance review. So the big mistake would be to do something like write my performance review on Marcos. Also rate him. This is what not to do. Do not delegate judgment to the AI. This is a really bad workflow, and you're going to end up with really bad results. There's no way the AI is going to be able to do a good job here. It's never going to have enough context. And you need to own these decisions when it comes to important things around performance. So this is a terrible way to use AI for performance. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't use AI when you're trying to think about things like a performance review, or maybe every month you want to have a bigger conversation with someone. I find the better way to do it is to do something like this. Can you give me 5 ideas for strengths and weaknesses with Marcos based on the one-on-ones, notes, and feedback? I want to write a performance review, and I want some ideas. So instead of using AI to do the judgment, I'm using AI essentially as an augmented memory layer. So I'm using it to surface patterns, trends, things that potentially are worthwhile to talk about. And I'm going to decide as the manager which of these I agree with and which of these are important. And that's what's going to feed in to kind of that performance review. Okay, Marcus, yes, Marcus. So it's pulling all this information and it's going to give me a list of suggested ideas. It's not going to just write the entire performance review. So here are some potential strengths: raises the design bar, craft rigor, design artifacts. Here are potential weaknesses and growth areas. And again, this is all based off of, because it has the context throughout the period. Over polishes before shipping, right? And I could say, I agree with 2 and 5 for strengths, and 2 and 3 for weaknesses. Delete everything else, right? And you can see how you can start to go back and forth trying to think through this performance review. Now, you can do this all in chat. And if you feed the right context in for into the AI, it can do a decent job. This is where Windmill, people love our interface for this, which is basically just a better version of what I just showed. So if I go into our performance review, so here's an example. This is doing a performance review through Windmill, and I go get started. The first thing you'll see is a quick catch me up to get an understanding of what this person's been working on. And then instead of like AI writing the review, we have this thing called observations, which is just kind of a souped up version of what I was just kind of showing you inside of Claude, where it is suggesting topics based off of self-reviews, based off peer reviews, based off of what the system identified. Windmill also connects to all your underlying integrations. And I am in control, and I can choose which of these I agree with. So if I agree with these items, I can choose to add them to the performance review, right? Blah, blah, blah. We're just gonna do this for fake right now. I choose the ratings critically, right? I choose, this is where you always want a person choosing these. Promotion readiness, I would choose that. And then the system can draft the review based off of all that manager input. So it's not drafting it from scratch. It is helping jog your memory, and then you're deciding what's important. You're giving the ratings, and then AI can be a helpful writing assistant kind of to write that out. So that's how it works in a platform. If you want to try to replicate a similar flow in Claude, this is the rough idea if you piece everything together. Now, one thing to be careful about is if you don't have a centralized system for this and you rely too much on Claude, everyone's going to do stuff slightly differently. And so you're going to end up with, it's very easy to end up in a spot where there's not a lot of consistency across the team, and people use AI in a slightly different way. And maybe some people kind of just did something like this where they just offloaded it entirely to the AI. And so you got to be really careful about that. And so most and this is more maybe on the HR side, but most HR people we'd talk to, they want to have some centralized control to make sure people are doing this in a consistent way. And that's, of course, where Windmill can fit in. So I know that was a lot. I showed a bunch of different use cases. The high-level takeaways that I want everyone to have are, one is kind of live artifacts and scheduled tasks. Definitely check those out in Cowork. And then two is the best way to use AI as a manager is to build out a kind of knowledge base of sorts, a second brain where you write down all of the critical information you don't want to forget, and then you use AI at the right moment to surface it at that later point in time. All right, so let's jump back into the slides now. I'm going to remove this from the screen. And we'll jump back in. I think we're a little short on time, so I'm going to skip over this section. I was going to talk a little bit about how you can measure AI adoption and how Windmill can help. I will just shorten that too. If you want help measuring AI adoption, Windmill has some tools there. And I did want to open it up to some Q&A. We're at the hour here, but I will stay as long as people have questions, and go through any questions people have about Windmill, about Cowork, or anything else. Angela has a question. How do we set up the Windmill shortcuts in Slack? I have Windmill in Slack, but I'm not seeing clear way to add. The shortcuts should automatically be there as soon as you install the Slack Windmill app. If you're having issues, reach out to support@gowindmill.com or our shared Slack Connect channel, but you should see those shortcuts there. They are sometimes a little bit buried under Connect apps. So sometimes they get a little bit buried there. So here's a question, or here's a comment from Morgan. I prefer to use it to turn my pros and cons list into a structured performance review and then edit it with accuracy and human touch. I like to avoid giving ideas or areas of opportunity. So yeah, I think the critical difference here is when I'm asking AI to surface strengths and areas for growth, this isn't just making it up. This is based off of all of the notes that I've saved throughout the period. You got to be careful about AI hallucinating. So, it is very critical that people are like a critical part of this. But if it's based off of one-on-one docs, based off of Slack conversations, one-on-one recordings, feedback, all of that kind of stuff, then I think it's pretty valid to use AI because it's really just surfacing stuff up. But if you don't give it much information and you're just like AI, make up some strengths, obviously you should not be doing that. It's all about the context you feed in, and you need to make sure across the company there's a systematic way where this context is being stored and permissioned. And so if you're not going to be using Windmill for that, you need to have some centralized way to make sure if you're using AI, it has all the right context. Okay. Any other questions, Nicole, that we wanted to talk through?
Yes, I see one other here that is about, does Windmill have a manager's skills package?
That's a great question. So we have some inside of the actual product. We call them prompt templates. We're actually going to be renaming them to skills, I think. We do have some baked in skills. So inside of Windmill, we don't have any skills available in Claude for manager skills, but if you go online, there's a million different options. They're all pretty similar. They're all going to be around like briefing you in the mornings, giving you feedback on meetings, helping you have difficult conversations is something I didn't go through. That's really helpful. We do have a cheat sheet. It doesn't give you the exact skills, but it gives you enough ideas. And if you just ask AI to help you generate the skills, that works pretty well. I would say all this stuff works best when it's heavily personalized to the way you work. And so I'd be a little careful about just taking some random skill off the internet that you've never seen before and then like totally using it to run your team. A much better way to work is to use a skill as inspiration, but then really build this up from first principles around like, how do you like to run your team?
Great. And then this was an earlier question, but it was around, can Claude Code's routines feature take care of this since it can run things remotely / on the cloud? I think this was related to your laptop having to be open.
Yeah, so there is Claude Code routines that will run inside of a sandbox, I believe, in the cloud. I think this can work, but you got to make sure the sandbox has access to all of the data you need and the MCPs that you need. So definitely this is a trickier setup and it's going to be a lot harder, which is why they're pushing you to just do it locally. With this workflow, you know if it works for you once, it's going to work forever, but you just have to keep your computer open. When you start deploying stuff to the cloud, it gets a lot more complicated. So I'm not going to go deep into there. But that's definitely a thing you can start to explore if you want to go a little bit deeper, is kind of running stuff in the cloud.
Great. And then I also wanted to highlight this comment from Amanda and see if you had any thoughts, Max. I think this is a challenge for a lot of companies right now.
Our teams store info in so many different places. Yeah. I mean, I think the short answer to this is why we think a tool like Windmill makes sense. If you want to have dedicated places where stuff is stored consistently. Now, it's okay if people have random personal documents in random personal places. That's not the end of the world. But it is critical that the important stuff is all stored ideally in a pretty consistent way across the organization. So things like one-on-one notes, I think, is a good example where if everyone has, and this is what most companies do, everyone has their own system, right? For how do they keep track of one-on-one notes? Some people use a shared Google Doc. Some people use a Notion. Some people use Apple Notes. Some people don't take any notes. Some people don't even have one-on-ones. Some people walk around the park and they don't jot anything down, right? Now, that's nice because people can do their own thing, but it's really hard to build a system, a repeatable system as a company around a process like that. So you want to give people flexibility, but I would recommend there needs to be some guardrails in place. And so having a consistent place being like, hey, when you have a one-on-one, you got to at least record some high-level notes in this system, I think makes a lot of sense. And then when you start to think about other things like, hey, we're moving someone to a new manager and I want to be able to hand off those one-on-one notes, it's really nice that there's a consistent way that that's all that's happening. Or if you're in HR and you want to make sure who's having one-on-ones and look at some accountability metrics, having a standardized place to do all that is really critical. Tools like Notion, I find, are pretty good tools for like general knowledge bases. Google Docs doesn't work nearly as well. And so I think in general, you want to be flexible, but you also need to centralize the tools enough that it's not just a free-for-all. If you want to have consistent standards, you don't want to force people into like some tool they don't want, right? And so obviously pick tools that people are already using. But I think it's much better to have everyone in Notion than half the company in Notion and half the company in Google Docs and then other people in like Asana. That's just like a much worse situation. Any other questions? I think we covered most of them. Nicole, anything else you're seeing?
No, I think we covered a majority of the ones asked. If people have any last minute questions, let us know. As Max mentioned, happy to stay on for a few. If not, awesome. We can hop off.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining. I hope that was helpful. If you have follow-up questions, definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn. If you found something interesting throughout this webinar, definitely post about it and we will repost you on LinkedIn or X or wherever you do socials. And we'll continue to do these in the future if people find them helpful. So thank you everyone for coming and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all.